Hey, welcome back. Mm, I'm really starting to enjoy this dimension where everything starts with in the previous episode. uh, I truly enjoy that. You can laugh, like I'm laughing, but I'm finding it very entertaining, I guess. Um, but I also kind of enjoy reiterating what we spoke about last time because I find it quite amusing to kind of follow all these red threads that intertwine and connect in various ways. So kind of like last two episodes we spoke about what art is and how it emerged, and how this dimension of transfer is something that impacts the artwork on one side, but it also impacts the creator because it's a dual process that goes both ways, which I find quite interesting because as the artwork changes, it becomes ultimately the entire narrative of art becomes its own Dorian Gray, and that is quite an interesting exchange and dimension that exists, I feel. And then further on, we spoke about aura. And what I think, when kind of like looking back and looking at the historical art canon, it's kind of interesting to see what kind of sentiments have been woven into the narrative as within the context of propagation of art. So art has had its periods of stagnation, of flourishing, of expansion and divergence. So all of these dimensions are also kind of tightly connected to the human sentiment and apprehension of art within the scope of historical narrative, which I find always very beautiful to think about, especially in the context of something that I think we will touch upon in the later episodes, which connects to the art as an asset and art within the context of financial exchange. But within the context that we have spoken of, what emerges is this quite distinct sentiment that we today connect to art, especially within the scope of existence where um, what is considered great art is dependent upon the coordinates of the group sentiment that categorizes such. And art until digital age has had a very clear connection to its own set of references where all the materials that have kind of gone into art have traditionally been connected to the evolutionary process that the earth itself has gone through. So what I'm speaking about is pigments, oil paint, etc., etc., etc. Also materials for sculpting. All of those are connected to the evolutionary process that the earth itself has undergone. Now in the later years we do have acrylics, and plastic has definitely entered the circuit of art canon. So we're kind of not shying away from what we're not shying away from novelty as art belongs to the age it is created in. So that kind of also is connected to the materials and whatnot. So, but I think this is the first time in human history that art is facing such a divergence within its own trajectory. And I find it quite peculiar and quite interesting, exactly because it kind of ties to our apprehension of art alongside the credence and the value attribute that is connected to it. I think it's kind of interesting exactly because there is no there is no discussion whether digital art is facing a very big backlash, and in many ways it is not surprising. However, it is interesting to look at such from the point of a generational gap, in a sense, where what is happening and how it is happening is tightly connected to where it is happening and why. I think as art is a peculiar creature in many ways. It's a peculiar discipline because it is heavily intertwined with two quite divergent aspects of human existence. On one side, we have the human narrative, as we have discussed previously, where the creational work is tightly dependent upon exchange that happens within the kinetic system. And on the other hand, it also kind of belongs to this category where it is tied to very large monetary sums. So it kind of exists as an asset, as a token of value. So within that specter, art kind of stands on this peculiar spot where credence starts playing a major role. So credence and conviction, how does one connect to these two attributes, becomes a heavily interesting matter, where the credence itself is contingent and underpinned by an entire set of generational changes that I think a lot of people have missed in many ways. And I'm sure that there are people that are speaking about this, but I have not encountered them that much, and I would appreciate, for that matter, references on this topic. If people know somebody who has spoken about all of these things, please don't hesitate to reach out and say hi. So I think one of the most interesting aspects of the age that we're living in, and as I mentioned, it was very tightly connected to the third, to the digital revolution, be it this or second or third. But it is quietly interesting. But I think that what we're experiencing today is tightly connected to the generational gap that enters the scene with the introduction of personal computers, of home computers. And I think this is something that is very often overlooked, as we are so focused on the emergence of these various tokens on one side that we kind of forget that everything is instigated at some point in history. So nothing emerges out of thin air. It might appear so, but there is always precursors that define and outline the emergence of potentiality that is going to come to define the present. So I think it's kind of interesting looking at it from that point where claims about art and what is art and what is not art are tightly connected to the referential network and to the credence attached to the set of references that any individual operates on. And I guess that in many ways digital art is... I'm kind of going back to Giorgio Agamben, and I'm not sure if I mentioned him last time, but I've definitely this dimension of what is contemporary, where on one side we're walking alongside a road, and on the other side we are incessantly observant about the existence of the parameters that define the present we are living, we're situated within, and as such kind of are at odds with the time frame, where on one side you're observing and on the other side, meaning that time stands still, on the other side you are still participatory. within the context of the present. So it is interesting kind of looking at digital art exactly from that point as a fissure, as a shock and novelty in many ways that kind of acts upon the premise of truth. And I will expand this a bit more afterwards, but it does exist upon the premise of truth, where as long as something materializes or manifests, there is a reason for such to have occurred to begin with. So I think it's interesting looking at it exactly from the point of attribute of credence and faith connected to digital art on one side, and on the other side I think it's kind of interesting looking at a social and geographical strata of people involved in the discourse, because there is very high discrepancy, and I hope that within next couple of episodes we'll be able to shed some light on why this is such. I think naturally one of the biggest challenges that digital art is encountering, like in my personal opinion, is this lack of tangibility. I think that throughout years, especially the last 2 decades, we have been conditioned into observing art as almost, I feel like this has just dawned upon me that art in many ways is like a teddy bear for adults. So when we have a teddy bear, when we were children, we were quite tightly connected to this set of references where we're connected to the set of references where we connect emotionally to teddy bear, partially because it's a big comforting thing. So it looks like a comforting thing, it feels like a comforting thing, but it's also the narrative itself that we are very connected to, that allows us to how do you call that? To transfer the emotional spectrum towards a narrative that we are complacent, that we're placing ourselves complacent within. So we like teddy bears. Teddy bears are cute and cuddly and very, very comforting. And I think art has, within the context of human sentiment, been rendered under such premises where, and I say it's it's like a teddy bear for adults, where it becomes this thing connected to tightly connected to the human sentiment that the age we're living in has dismantled in many ways, and as such is acting within the context of it kind of acts as a token of something that we're attempting to remember and try to hold on, while simultaneously knowing that there is levels to our immersion into that particular dream that is being spelled out. So I think it's kind of interesting looking at the art from that point, where tangibility plays a very major role in that experience, in that comforting experience. And I think kind of taking away that tangibility is a bit of a breach of contract for many people immersed in the artistic narrative. And this is kind of like when I spoke about art as ideology, I think it truly touches upon these particular premises, exactly as it points out certain dimensions that have coaxed art as a discipline to exist within. It's a bit of a different narrative, and we'll speak about it more. But I think it's kind of this dimension where digital art truly breaches with the uniformity of historicity, which has always been tightly connected to the materialization of objects. So, in a way, taking away this tangibility is like taking away this aspect of this comforting aspect of art, something that kind of ties to this dimension of real. And as such, it doesn't like I think it's kind of interesting to think that digital art does not necessarily validate the experience as it is, and I think it's quite interesting for me to look at it from that point. However, if one kind of thinks about what art is and how we have kind of attempted to define it throughout the series, I can't necessarily see a direct breach when it comes to the question whether digital art is art at all. However, it is definitely a branch of art that is at the forefront of the solution of the traditional aesthetics and the traditional narrative as it has been presented to us. And I think it kind of, in many ways, digital art stands like this l'enfant terrible. And sorry for pardon my French that I do not speak. But it becomes interesting kind of looking from the point where digital art in many ways emerges as a token of something and emerges as a token of something that has existed for a good 10 to 15 years and traces back to the whole computers and emerges of whole computers and the change within the consciousness and cognitive perspective of how we deal with information on many levels. And so phone computers kind of like come about at the same time as the Western world is slowly but steadily escaping the slowly but steadily escaping this narrative of that world wars have introduced to us. World wars and then the Cold War have been afterwards. So we kind of have all these kind of dark historical events that are defined by the breach of corporeal barrier and in the most animalistic and brutal way on one side. And 10 to 15, 20 years later, as things heal and change, especially when we're speaking about psychedelic movements that have emerged in most in America and then somewhat in Britain. But it becomes interesting kind of looking at it from the point where hand computers kind of come about exactly in the period when new generations are emerging that are thoroughly removed from the destructive narrative that the generations prior have been immersed in. And as such, we're adopting a new mindset that is heavily influenced by one of my favorite things to do is to watch old commercials because they do kind of give you a sense of the place and the narrative placement that is defined by the hierarchical trickling down. So this dimension where the perspective of how humanity is defined and looked at is tightly connected to is tightly connected to this generational shift that doesn't also occur on the premises of computers, but it kind of occurs on the premises of dissolution and kind of moving away from destructiveness of human nature and kind of define and emphasize to a state of the modern world where peace defines the coordinates and peace within the scope of possibility that human existence can offer. So
let's not romanticize that narrative either. However, this dimension of change became truly palatable to me who kind of comes from a war affected area, where this dimension of the outlook and the sentiment that is defining the future generations is very, very, very different than what, for example, our parents have grown up with. Not even like we don't even have to go many generations back in time in order to see the change. Um, so it is interesting to me, kind of looking at it, because in so computers also bring about an entirely new set of interface that for the first time in history allows human mind to immerse oneself into this phantasmagorical narrative through means of gaming. And it also kind of clearly starts expanding his circles and interconnectivity. Speed of information, propagation information increases drastically. And it was kind of a things about brains being molded from that point. Oh, reality the generations before that didn't have the same access as we do now kind of feel kind of anchored in history and very, very far history exactly because of the speed of information, complacent, and then it was complacency within the coordinates, agency within the coordinates, and ultimately from what is the dominating sentiment that defines the apprehension at large is looked upon changes drastically. And again, it's clearly interesting. We spoke about we briefly spoke about how kind of coming to closer to cultural epicenters becomes this thing we becomes this thing where the emergence of the World Wide Web changes completely the prospects of human sentiment and how such is kind of looked upon and how we deal with it. It also kind of changes drastically within the context of upbringing, because before humans were the ones that were nursing future generations, and now we kind of have internet. The internet is the one that I feel is the main point of um, educational and disciplinary. Like it's a main provider of educational and disciplinary premise. So it is quite interesting to look at it from that point. And I think that a lot of the narrative becomes even more peculiar as exactly the prior generations were always immersed in this quite destructive narrative that has followed the Western world quite tightly, and also everybody else outside of it. And as I said, the more the I suppose that what we spoke about is how connection to these cultural epicenters brings about speed of propagation of information and adaptation of information within that context. Whilst on the other side, what becomes interesting is this dimension where the further you're going to come away from that, the less defined one is by historical narrative. So it becomes truly interesting looking at it from the point of um, future pacing. And it kind of goes back to that song, Heaven is a Place of Earth. Was it DJ Bobo? I hope it was DJ Bobo. But if it wasn't, Heaven is a place on Earth. But it's kind of the same thing. Future is a place on Earth. Kind of depending on what's on latitude point. And I think it's kind of interesting looking at it from that perspective, especially as whole computers bring about a very interesting narrative to the table where some whole computers, so whole computers bring about a very interesting narrative to the table because the human mind on one side used to be anchored in this dimension of suffering. And I think through the world wars that I'm speaking about on one side, but also through this dimension of religious indoctrination, because we can kind of laugh at church now, but church religion have had quite deep clutches into the previous generations. And even I hold is reasonably, well, I'm neo-spiritualist. Um, I see that there's the dimension of energetical exchange defined or underpinned by evolutionary process that uh, ties very heavily to GTD Agostino's riddle. Here, what I'm bringing to the table today are 90s techno tracks, so please feel free, enjoy. But what I'm trying to say is that this dimension emerges where previous generations have always been kind of anchored into this dimension of suffering, both from the religious prospect, but also from the point of the historical narrative where war and scarcity have always kind of paraded. Well, the narrative every 50 or so years. So every generation has encountered something like that. But what happens is interesting within the scope of existence where new minds completely absorbed from the suffering or from the connotations of suffering on one side are also kind of starting to be immersive phantasmagorical interface provided by development of games and consoles. And I think kind of interesting because up to a certain point, this immersion into phantasmagorical was so reserved for those who were reading or had the access to cartoons. And even cartoons did not rely or were not like attainable all the time, and it took a very long time to make them. It took a long time to create them. So all these things were kind of not quite interesting to get from the point of exchange of parameters. That's kind of what happens within production of computers and digital medium at a very specific time in human history. So it then kind of goes back down to this dimension of access and how such is looked upon and interacted with, where the generational, like the changes in references start creating this gap that potentially wasn't as palpable in the beginning, but it does remind me, it's not kind of reminds me of something else. It reminds me there is a Serbian anecdote about a servant who discovered that their master has a vicar and where to mask the secret. And his bewilderment, he wanted to tell Pamela, but he knew that if he were to do so, he would likely die. So the poor man picks out a hole, and in that hole he yells the secret out with his full lungs. But Calvary Pap realized that within a couple of years, a tree grew out in that spot, and the tree, every time the wind blow, the tree would spread the rumor by itself. So it is not always that we're seeing the immediately. It's not always the immediate effects that have the biggest impact, but the aftermath can be something to. So this aftermath can become one of those things that carry the biggest weight within the context. And I think that's quite interesting to think about exactly within the context of truth telling. So emergence and manifestation of actuality is always correctly connected to the emergence of truth. So in many ways, digital art emerges as a core shoe, and it becomes a token of a narrative that wasn't potentially as visible when we entered into it, but it definitely becomes of such. But definitely becomes such um, when within the prospect of time. The proof is quite interesting within that scope, and I think this generational gap also kind of becomes quite interesting within that scope, where truth potentially has this ambivalent validity where we can't actually, if it's a little like actuality, reality, we can say that that truth exists, but there is no truth as a concept, because every single exchange of elements within the context of narrative is based upon the premises of plausibility and possibility. So it kind of becomes a mathematical thing where uh, um, credence and percentage of something happening unlocks the more intertwined with the concept of truth, rather than being a reified and can create unit that like those in number world there is structure. The fact is that truth is a very it's in a state of flux as everything else, and it might be very difficult to deal with that. But the fact is that potential truth does not exist within the concept as we had imagined it, but it does exist within the context of emergence, where it underpins the parameters with the most that have been attached, that have credence attached, more credence attached to it. So within that context, when we kind of look at digital art exactly as a form of truth, an emergence or a token that defines the change and the gap in the conscious perspective. It is not solely tied to again to the age and generation, but it also kind of is tied to where and what and why. And that particular dimension brings us back to the crossroads. They call them this crossroads, the socio-economical and geopolitical, where this dimensional access and allowance, not fully access, but this dimensional access and um, exposure to certain forms of information is contingent or defines the flow of the further flow of trajectory. And to me, it got through truly interesting exactly from the point where emergence of digitalization is and has been traditionally played within US and several tech countries that we'll find in Asia. But this dimension of the algorithm access to the chemical enhancements of different comrades, it is potential for creation of the fantasy world that one can immerse oneself in is something that is tightly connected to the historical art canon, especially of painting. Alongside, but it also kind of becomes very tightly connected to very different and very interesting set of premises that are not as easily investigated and are not as easily being investigated exactly because of the parameters of access, prohibition, legalization, and a lot of other things. Um, But I think it's quite interesting, kind of looking also towards digital art as it's referential to the narrative and the semiotic mm, that this exists within. And it also kind of it's interesting kind of looking at the scope of apprehension of how digital art is talked about, because it felt becomes so apparent that the closer one is to technological epicenters, the more one is understanding of what is emerged and why it is emerged as such. And one side, while on the other side, the film becomes this dimension where I feel, especially I feel kind of like Europe has is challenged by digital art in many ways. It's actually because Europe has always been the cradle of culture, especially when it comes to arts. So, and it has been so through this true fetishization of certain elements that have definitely proven themselves as quite prolific within the context. But I think the another thing becomes quite interesting within the prospect of exchange where um, I think I see that especially again in developed countries, this immersion into science fiction of the chemical components as mentioned has opened up the space for incessant propagation towards novelty. So on one side, on the other side, I have Europe that when I speak with a lot of people that kind of come out of universities and a lot of places and things like that, it becomes interesting exactly from the point of film becomes with actually kind of interesting from the point of dark academia in many ways, and how this sanity land of I don't know, in those co-eds still lingers. So it's kind of a faltable, the how we as humanity deal with digitalization becomes quite interesting, exactly looking at it from the geopolitical narrative and socioeconomical, the cultural ties and apprehension of your corpus within the coordinates of past, present, and future are the ones that define that particular exchange. And for me, it becomes quite fascinating thinking about it and to me, it becomes quite fascinating looking at the world from that point where it's not solely what is happening, but we have this dimension of emotion and spectrum, emotional spectrum, the transfer uh, that we spoke about the previous episode starts developing. I think where, especially kind of when you see materials and how different approaches to art exist based upon the premises of closeness to the nature in many ways or levels away from nature. That they kind of like, it's interesting looking what art is in Scandinavia, how art is in Scandinavia on one side, and on the other side, it's quite interesting to see what American art is and how American art is. And validity is naturally one of those dimensions where all the credence plays a major role, but also this referential set that we kind of was speaking about, the fact that artists always exist within the scope of one's own narrative. So the set of references transferred within the artistic development and artistic endeavor is kind of connected to that very exchange that happens on the cultural basis as we grow up. So again, levels of proximity to cultural epicenters and immersion into the narrative are the ours that kind of truly define the state we are in today. And it's kind of interesting whether one looks at the state we are in today as a bifurcation on one side, or if one kind of looks at it as a phase transition. And I think the difference is that bifurcation is a hard line that acknowledges that there is a split here within the apprehension where digital art and traditional art layer universes of approximation in between. While from the other side, phase realization operates within the focal acceptance that present is continuing, whether we want it or not. So it is quite interesting looking at it, where not solely what art is, but how, and not solely how art is, but what art is looked upon, and how the sentiment that we have mentioned in the previous episode, the earlier in the episode, kind of what comes about, exactly the premises of exchange of the interface and medium, the preferred medium interaction for the generations that are growing up. So where we all had pen and paper, they have keyboards. And I say they because I have not grown up with a computer just due to the circumstances. Also, in many ways, I feel that I am in the middle of that very exchange that is happening with all its prospects. And I think it's really interesting because it does touch upon this breast of human element. And I'm bound by emotional historicity, where, again, the change of sentiment and what one is used to becomes all for its own referential. So, and that kind of goes for the sounds, for the color system, or what one enjoys having underneath from fingertips. But it's also how one kind of deals with the presented information within the context of both credence, but also apprehension of information that one is exposed to. For example, once upon a time, my approach to art has always been quite organic. And I wouldn't have minded all things that I have kind of gone away from. And I think it's very interesting for me also to look at how this 5-year crash course in human history has also changed my perspective on how I want my art to, like what I perceive within the prospect of information exchange, contextualized through the employee medium. So in many ways, I feel like there's full pineapple, rhinoceros, and all of the other things in the room that one needs to address, but it's quite difficult still to do so within the certain prospects. And today, it is quite the interesting space that we're embodying today, exactly because traditionally the entire scope of our artistic history has always been connected to this dimension of suffering and exchange and relation / descendants, contingent upon praise and elevation that emerges from those prospects. While the narrative that dominates today's society is much closer to Pharrell's happy, so the prank happy, than it is through any form of biasness that defines previous iterations. And it feels like it'd be interesting to look how such it is going to change from both across. Like it's funny, interesting. Again, we'll get to because our company consider that it's been affected by something, and it has definitely affected the growth and development, especially on the emotional spectrum. And with again underpiece a sentiment that allows for further development or not. So all of it is quite fascinating to look at from long point because you can kind of see an incredible. I can clearly see how the westernized countries that have not been affected by is it kind of not been it's not that enough have been affected, but how the conscious development of what is apprehended as important and how the structuring of the narrative exists upon a different set of premises where, again, happiness and self-satisfaction do reign supreme under where conditions are, again, socio-economical and geopolitical. So I'm not going to say too much about that particular topic, but it definitely has its own space only. But it is kind of interesting looking at it exactly from the point where, and a completely an entirely different sentiment pervades the future generations or the generations that have started kind of growing up in the early 90s, especially within the context of how society is apprehended and the self is apprehended within that scope. So like what matters and how language is contextualized. So all this becomes truly interesting exactly from the point where the change of narrative becomes a harbinger of times that are yet to come. So 10 to 15 years of indoctrination, not indoctrination, but of exposure to different set of references really inevitably yield a different formula. And it's some like in this discussion whether digital art is, and especially within the context of generative art, love generative art right now. And I'll speak to you about the next episode why I do enjoy it so much. But I think this dimension where whether something is art or not is an nonsensical narrative where you were art canon because the carrier he I don't know how to speak. Sorry. I can know about or there was a lot of big words. But it's almost because this dimension where something as kind of a smooth fetal or it's not arbitrary introduction of all computers on first time in human history so far. But it's definitely something that changes how we interact completely. And within such context, the emergence of digital art and generative art becomes its own token of truth and a manifestation of a particular sentiment. And kind of going back to what is art and what is not, I think as long as there's a human being that acts within its scope as a conductor, and there is a medium that within its scope, again, has the capacity to create works, the question that emerges is not whether this is art or not. I think the question that emerges is the one of energetical transfer and the impact such exists upon, because what we speak about is I think what we speak about is actually something quite different, where the digitalization and the employment of human computer is not because human computer is like a human computer. I'm sorry, the computer is always looked upon as an inanimate object that does not have capacity to exert its own will, nor does it have capacity to project. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we say that computers do not have the capacity to project the human sentiment and can be accounted as media with the potential for transfer of such that is, again, highly lauded within the context of art and has been so for decades and centuries, but considered that day. But what becomes truly beautiful to me is exactly this exchange where we can agree that pen or a brush have the capacity to convey the human sentiment in the narrative, while we say that the computer doesn't have the capacity. And to me, it becomes really interesting exactly from the point of credence that is a package to art. That is, again, resting upon the set of referentials that define every generation or every age. And I mean, world is funny. World is very, very funny and exists upon supernatural premises where the exchange that occurs is of a character that it's a peculiar character, definitely. And it's not without its challenges. Oh, especially like it both kind of things about like if you when I kind of hear people speak about art and digital art, what becomes quite interesting is this uh, connection to the set of attributes so that render it, for example, cold or inhuman. And I think it's kind of become such an interesting discussion of because it's tightly connected to this dimension of sensitivity and again the referential, where the amount of emotion that is needed to affect one within the scope of interaction is again its own referential and very much subjective one at it as well, and at it a subjective one as well. So it becomes quite interesting looking at um, the discourse on digital art as pointer of apprehension and access through the means of understanding the referential set that underpins it. Um, and it's a very peculiar topic to think about and to discuss. So I hope that there are certain aspects that I have managed to bring about and illuminate for other people to immerse themselves in and contemplate upon. And with such, I'm going to say thank you for listening and looking forward to next